I moved into Willow Creek Estates on a Tuesday in September, the kind of crisp autumn morning that makes you believe you've made all the right decisions. The neighborhood was pristine, almost suspiciously so, with manicured lawns that looked like they'd been trimmed with surgical scissors and houses painted in an approved palette of tasteful beiges and soft grays. My new home was a charming colonial with black shutters, and I'd paid cash for it after selling my consulting firm in the city. I was looking forward to a quieter life, maybe finally writing that book I'd been planning, enjoying my early retirement at 42. I should have known something was wrong when I noticed the woman standing on the sidewalk during my move, clipboard in hand, watching the movers with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a field mouse. She was probably in her mid-50s, with that particular haircut that seemed to defy both gravity and good judgment, shorter in the back and aggressively angular in the front. Her fleece vest had HOA president embroidered on it in gold thread, and she wore it like a military uniform. "So you're the new owner of 217 Maple Drive?" she called out, not bothering with pleasantries like hello or welcome to the neighborhood. Her voice had that sharp quality that suggested years of practice at complaint lodging. I set down the box I was carrying and walked over with what I hoped was a friendly smile. "I am," I said, extending my hand. "Your moving truck is parked 6 inches over the property line into the common area," she interrupted, ignoring my hand entirely. "That's a violation of Section 12.3 of the HOA bylaws. I'll let it slide this once since you're new, but consider this your warning. Make sure to hit that like button if you're already team protagonist, and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this one ends." I blinked at her, processing this bizarre welcome. The moving truck was barely touching anything that could be considered common area, and even if it was, who greets their new neighbor with a bylaws violation? But I'd dealt with difficult personalities in my business career, so I kept my composure. "I apologize," I said smoothly. "I'll have them adjusted immediately." "And you are?" "Karen Westfield. HOA president for 6 years running," she said with unmistakable pride. "I take the rules very seriously around here. This is a premium neighborhood, and we maintain standards. I'll be by tomorrow to inspect your property for compliance. Make sure your trash cans are stored out of sight, your lawn furniture matches the approved color scheme, and that wreath on your door needs to come down. We're not in the holiday decoration period yet." The wreath was a simple autumn arrangement with some tasteful leaves and pine cones. "It's just seasonal decor," I pointed out. "Surely that's." "The bylaws are very clear," Karen said, tapping her clipboard. "Decorations are only permitted during designated periods. Autumn decorations may be displayed from October 1st through November 30th. It's September 26th. That's a violation." She made a note on her clipboard with a flourish that suggested she was enjoying this far too much. Over the next few weeks, I discovered that Karen's visit during my move-in was not an anomaly but rather a preview of coming attractions. She had turned the Homeowners Association into her personal fiefdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive pleasantries and an encyclopedic knowledge of every obscure bylaw ever written. My mailbox was filled with violation notices printed on official HOA letterhead that Karen had clearly designed herself, complete with a logo that looked like a gavel crossed with a suburban house. The first official violation came because my garbage cans were visible from the street for approximately 45 minutes after the truck had emptied them. I'd been on a conference call and hadn't rushed out immediately. The fine was $50. The second violation was because I'd planted roses in my front garden, and apparently, the specific shade of pink I'd chosen was not on the pre-approved plant list. Another $75 fine. When I pointed out that my next-door neighbor had the exact same roses, Karen had simply smiled and said, "I'll be addressing that next." I tried being reasonable. I attended the monthly HOA meetings, sat through Karen's PowerPoint presentations about the importance of maintaining property values and community standards. I watched her shoot down every suggestion from other homeowners with procedural objections and references to Robert's Rules of Order. She'd somehow gotten herself a position of absolute authority, partly through sheer force of will and partly because most people couldn't be bothered to run against her. Why would anyone want the job? But then Karen started getting personal. She began walking past my house 3, sometimes 4 times a day, always with that clipboard, always finding something new to cite. My doormat was 2 inches too large. My garden hose was visible from the street. I'd parked my car in my driveway facing the wrong direction. That last one wasn't even in the bylaws, she'd just decided it looked untidy and wrote me up anyway. When I pushed back politely at a meeting, Karen's eyes had narrowed. Some people, she'd announced to the room, seem to think the rules don't apply to them. That they're special. But I can assure you, in Willow Creek Estates, everyone follows the same standards. No exceptions. The way she'd looked at me made it clear I'd just made an enemy. Things escalated quickly after that. Karen filed a complaint with the county saying my fence was 3 inches over the property line. It wasn't, but I had to pay for a surveyor to prove it. She claimed my air conditioning unit was too loud and demanded I have it inspected, another few $100s. She organized a special assessment vote to repave the streets and allocated the highest portion of the cost to my property based on some convoluted formula she'd invented. When I questioned it, she'd smiled sweetly and said, "I'm just following the bylaws. Perhaps you should read them more carefully." I started keeping a file. Every violation notice, every fine, every complaint. I documented everything with timestamps and photographs. Old habits from my consulting days, where I'd learned that information was power and documentation was protection. I also started doing research into HOA law, property rights, and local ordinances. I'd built a multi-million-dollar business by identifying problems and engineering solutions. Karen was definitely a problem. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in November. I woke up to find Karen standing in my driveway, taking photographs of my house. When I opened the door in my bathrobe, she didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. "You have Christmas lights up," she announced triumphantly. "It's November 18th. The holiday decoration period doesn't begin until November 25th. That's a $200 fine for a major violation." I looked at the single strand of white lights I'd put up along my roofline the evening before. I'd planned to test them before the approved period and then unplug them. They weren't even turned on. "Those aren't decorations," I said, keeping my voice level. "They're not lit. I'm installing them early so I don't have to do it in the cold next week." "They're visible," Karen said, her voice rising. "Visible equals displayed, which equals a violation. I've already submitted the fine to the HOA account. And while I'm here, your lawn has not been mowed to the regulation 3-inch height." I measured. "It's 3.4 inches in the northwest corner." She held up a ruler like it was Excalibur. Something in me snapped. Not into anger, but into clarity. I'd been approaching this all wrong, trying to be reasonable with someone who had no interest in reason. Karen didn't care about the neighborhood or property values. She cared about power, about control, about making people bend to her will. She'd turned the HOA into her own little kingdom, and she was drunk on the authority. I smiled at her, a genuine smile that seemed to confuse her. "You're absolutely right, Karen," I said. "I should be more careful about following the rules. In fact, I think I need to study the bylaws much more carefully. Really get to know them inside and out." She'd looked suspicious, but also satisfied. "Good. It's about time you took this seriously." After she left, I made a phone call to my former business partner, Marcus, who'd gone into real estate development after we'd sold the company. Then I called my attorney, Catherine, who specialized in property law and had helped me navigate some complex zoning issues during my business days. Then I called my friend James, who worked for the county planning department and owed me a favor from when I'd helped his sister's startup get off the ground. Over the next 2 weeks, I became an expert on Willow Creek Estates. I obtained copies of all the original development documents, the HOA bylaws, the county records, the title histories. I attended county planning meetings. I had long conversations with Catherine about property law and HOA regulations. I reviewed every single rule that Karen had been enforcing with such enthusiasm. And I found something very, very interesting. The common area that Karen was so protective of, the little strip of grass and trees that ran along the back of the neighborhood, technically wasn't owned by the HOA. Through an oversight in the original development paperwork, it had remained property of the development company, which had gone bankrupt years ago. The land had eventually reverted to county ownership due to unpaid taxes, and then been sold at auction. The current owner was a holding company that had forgotten they owned it. Marcus made some calls. The holding company was happy to sell the worthless strip of land for a reasonable price. They probably thought I was an idiot for wanting it. The transaction was completed in 3 days. But that was just the beginning. Because once I owned that land, I started reviewing what I could do with it. And according to county zoning laws, that strip was actually zoned for limited commercial use, a leftover from the original development plans. The HOA bylaws couldn't restrict what I did with property I owned outside the HOA boundaries, even if it bordered the neighborhood. I called a contractor. Then I called the county permits office. James helped expedite the paperwork. Everything was done by the book, completely legal, all permits properly filed and approved. Karen's next violation notice arrived on a Monday. I'd left my garbage can visible for 3 hours past the pickup time. Another $50 fine. She'd hand-delivered it, ringing my doorbell with that self-satisfied look on her face. "You know," she said, "I'm starting to think you're leaving these violations on purpose. Some kind of passive-aggressive rebellion. But I want you to know that I will never get tired of enforcing the rules. Never." She leaned in closer. "I've broken tougher homeowners than you. There was a man on Birch Street who thought he could fight me. He ended up selling his house at a loss just to get away from the fines. So if you're planning something, don't bother. You can't win against the HOA. You can't win against me." I smiled at her again. "You're absolutely right, Karen. You're very thorough. Actually, I wanted to thank you for being so diligent about the rules. You've taught me so much about the importance of following proper procedures and using the system correctly." She looked confused again, but pleased. "Well. Good. I'm glad you're finally learning." The next morning, Karen called 911. I know this because I heard the sirens and went outside to find 2 police cars in front of her house, 3 doors down from mine. Karen was on her front lawn in her bathrobe, pointing frantically toward the back of the neighborhood and shouting at the officers. "She's trespassing. She's destroying common property. She had no right. No permission. Arrest her. Arrest her right now." I walked down the street with my coffee, curious. One of the officers saw me approaching. "Are you the homeowner at 217 Maple Drive?" he asked. "I am," I confirmed. "Ma'am, do you know anything about construction happening on the property behind this neighborhood?" "I do," I said pleasantly. "I'm the property owner. All the permits are filed with the county. I'd be happy to show you the documentation." Karen's face turned an interesting shade of purple. "You can't own that property. That's HOA common area. That's our property." I turned to her with my most sympathetic expression. "Actually, Karen, it's not. If you check the original development documents, which I have here on my phone, you'll see that land was never properly transferred to the HOA. I purchased it from the legal owner 3 weeks ago. All the title work is recorded with the county. It's completely legitimate." Catherine had prepared a packet for exactly this moment. I showed the officers the deed, the title insurance, the permits. Everything was in perfect order. They looked at Karen, who was sputtering incoherently, and then back at me. "Looks like everything's legal, ma'am," the officer said to Karen. "This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You'll need to take it up with your HOA attorney." After the police left, Karen stood in her yard, shaking with rage. "What are you building back there? What are you doing?" I smiled. "Just following the zoning laws, Karen. Everything's properly permitted. You've taught me so much about the importance of following the rules." I walked back to my house and let the contractor continue his work. By that evening, Karen had discovered what I was building. She went door to door in the neighborhood, ringing doorbells, showing people photos on her phone, her voice getting more shrill with each house. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Everyone wanted to see Karen lose her mind in person. She'd prepared a presentation, of course, complete with photos and maps and a printed list of demands. "This woman," she announced, pointing at me, "has betrayed this entire community. She has purchased the land behind our neighborhood and has begun construction on a facility that will destroy our property values and ruin the peaceful character of Willow Creek Estates. I am calling for an emergency vote to take legal action against her immediately." She clicked to her first slide. It showed the construction site. The foundation had been poured. The framing was going up. You could see what it was going to be. "She is building," Karen said, her voice dripping with outrage, "a storage facility. A public storage facility. Right behind our homes. With orange roll-up doors and security lights and trucks coming and going at all hours." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Karen looked triumphant. But I raised my hand calmly. "May I respond?" I asked. The HOA board members, who were all terrified of Karen but also clearly exhausted by her, nodded. I stood up, relaxed and confident. "Everything Karen said is true," I confirmed. "I am building a storage facility on my property. It's zoned for it. It's permitted for it. It's completely legal. In fact, I filed all the permits with the county and followed every single regulation. I even exceeded the landscaping requirements and added extra sound barriers." "But why would you do this?" someone called out. "You live here." I smiled. "Well, I started reviewing the HOA bylaws very carefully, like Karen always encouraged me to do. And I noticed something interesting. The bylaws say that homeowners cannot run businesses from their residential properties. But they don't say anything about homeowners owning businesses on non-residential properties adjacent to the neighborhood. Because whoever wrote the bylaws never imagined that land could be purchased separately." Karen's face was getting redder. "You're doing this to spite me? To get revenge?" "Not at all," I said smoothly. "I'm doing this as a business investment. The storage facility industry is very profitable. And this location is perfect, right off the main road, easy access, but tucked behind an established neighborhood. I expect to be fully operational in 6 weeks." I pulled out my own folder. But here's the really interesting part. While I was researching property records, I discovered something else. "Karen, you've been filing violation notices and fines against homeowners for 6 years. Hundreds of them. Thousands of dollars in fines." I paused for effect. "But the HOA bylaws require that all fines be approved by a majority vote of the board of directors before they're assessed. Did you know that?" The room went very quiet. Karen's mouth opened and closed. I continued. "I pulled the minutes from every board meeting for the past 6 years. There's no record of any votes approving these fines. Which means every single fine you've assessed has been illegal. You've been collecting money without authorization. That's not a civil matter, Karen. That's fraud." One of the board members, a quiet man named Tom who Karen had bullied for years, suddenly sat up straighter. "Is that true?" he asked. "Did we never vote on the fines?" I handed him my research. The bylaws are very clear. Section 22.7. All fines must be approved by a board vote. Karen has been acting unilaterally for years. Karen tried to recover. That's a technicality. Everyone knew about the fines. The board approved them implicitly. But I wasn't done. I also filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. About 2 hours ago. I included documentation of every illegal fine, every unauthorized penalty, every dollar collected without proper approval. I believe they take financial impropriety in HOA management very seriously." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, pulling out their phones to check their records of fines paid. Tom was flipping through the bylaws with increasing horror. Karen was trying to talk over everyone, insisting that she'd done everything for the good of the neighborhood, that this was all a misunderstanding. And that's when the police arrived for the second time that week. But this time, they weren't there because Karen had called them. They were there for Karen. The officers walked into the community center where we held our meetings. One of them was holding a warrant. "Karen Westfield?" he said. "We need you to come with us to answer some questions about financial irregularities in the homeowners association accounts." Karen's face went white. "What? No. This is absurd. I'm the HOA president. I've done nothing wrong." "Ma'am, you can answer our questions voluntarily, or we can make this more difficult. The State Attorney General's office has received a complaint about unauthorized collection of funds and potential fraud. We need you to come with us." I watched as Karen looked around the room, searching for support, for someone to defend her. But the same neighbors she'd terrorized for years just stared back at her with a mixture of shock and, in some cases, barely concealed satisfaction. Tom was already on his phone, probably calling the HOA attorney. "This is your fault," Karen hissed at me as the officers guided her toward the door. "You've destroyed everything. You've ruined this neighborhood." I met her eyes calmly. "I just followed the rules, Karen. Isn't that what you always wanted?" As they led her out, I could see her face changing as the full scope of what had happened finally hit her. The storage facility that would permanently damage her precious property values. The fraud investigation that would likely result in criminal charges. The fact that I'd used her own obsession with rules and procedures to dismantle everything she'd built. The realization that by teaching me to care about bylaws and regulations and proper procedures, she'd given me exactly the weapons I needed to defeat her. And the best part? Every single thing I'd done was completely legal. If you enjoyed watching Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people facing epic karma. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next one.